Hello everyone, welcome to our second video in the series on Square and the coronavirus.
We're going to discuss the fears and the big challenges that are being faced by people who are at the order-based terrain. And the reason that we wanted to do this series on the fears of the different terrains is each terrain has got its own type of fear and its own source of fear. And even if you're not at the terrain that we're talking about, hopefully through watching this, it will help you have some compassion for the people in your life who are at Square, who are at the order-based terrain, and who may be finding some of this stressful. And once you see this and really understand where they're coming from, you can have a lot more compassion and empathy for them. And if you haven't already seen our previous video where we explain the perspective of Square, the order-based terrain, and really how things are playing out at that terrain during this coronavirus situation, go back and watch that video. You can see it here. So what would you say is the biggest fear that people at Square are facing right now in the middle of this crisis?
Well, from a psychological perspective, I would say that because it's an outer-directed terrain, it's what's coming at someone at Square that is their greatest fear. It's the fear of the unknown. What is out there that could harm me? What is out there that could harm my family? What is out there that could harm my group, my community? So the biggest fear is the fear of the unknown. And with this coronavirus situation happening, that is very much an unknown that is causing everybody to react because they can't grasp it. It's an invisible enemy. That makes it even worse. It'd be one thing if you had another nation trying to overrun your shores. At least you'd have an idea that, okay, we got a bunch of boats coming at us. We got to defend our borders, as we discussed previously about borders and order. But here it's something that we don't know where it's coming from. We don't know how it's getting in. We don't know how to defend ourselves from it. We can't put our finger on it. So it's even a greater fear of the unknown than would normally be faced in other historical contexts.
And I feel that there's a lot of fears and challenges being faced at the moment by people at this terrain. One of the other ones is at this terrain there tends to be a deep need for certainty, predictability, and order. Like that the system is orderly and that we can predict. There's longevity in our systems. We can predict what's going to happen. We know that every 3 years or every 5 years, depending on the country, there's an election. We know how things are going to unfold in our society. And at the moment, things are changing so fast. The laws are coming down like every week. It's like stage 3 lockdown, stage 4 lockdown. Like it's changing so fast that is very challenging for people at Square who are used to a system that always is the same and that runs according to the same schedules. And so you know when new laws are going to come in and you're going to know when people are going to be elected. This is all happening very quickly and it's hard for people to stay up to date. And I feel that creates a lot of unease and distress for people at Square who need a lot of predictability in their system.
Well, and I think the point that Tahnee's touched on is an important one, that Square likes things to be predictable and known. And so even if you are going to have legislation to change, there's a lead up to it, there's debate, there's a process. Here, authorities have decided this is what we have to do, so this is what we're instituting. And if we find new data, we'll change course tomorrow and change course again the next day. And for Square, there's a process by which they come to change. To have that thrown out the window is instilling a much deeper reaction and fear and challenge than they would normally otherwise have in front of them.
And I feel that one of the really big stressors and worries at the moment for people at this terrain, the order-based terrain, is the issue of the economy and their financial stability. Because one of the key drivers at this terrain, which is different at other terrains, at this terrain is the need for financial security and financial stability. This is not a terrain where people risk everything on the stock market or they risk everything on a grand entrepreneurial venture that they just risk everything on and believe in themselves and trust their dreams. It's not. It's a terrain where people build and they save and they have superannuation and they're building towards a predictable future where they know that they're going to be secure in the long run and that their family's going to be provided for. That's not everyone at Square, but that's most people at Square because the deep need at this terrain is for order, predictability, and stability. And so it's really where people at Square live, this feeling of financial security rather than financial independence. So it's not easy for people at Square to go, well, I guess I've lost my job and I can't pay my mortgage and my rent, but I'm going to start a home business and totally be radical and think differently out of the box. Unless they're an extremely creative personality type, which they may be, but the vast majority of people at Square are going to find that really, really daunting, because they're actually at a terrain where they need predictable long-term creation of financial security. And right now, a lot of people are losing their jobs, or even worse, they don't know if they've lost their job. They've just been told they can't go back to work for a few months, so they can't even start looking for a new job because they don't even know if they've still got their old job.
And the fear is, as Tahnee's alluding to, because it's a role-based terrain, people are identified based on the roles they play. You grow up, you go to school, you either become a trade person or a professional, you train into that role, you go through your life climbing the ladder in that role, and you save accordingly for your retirement from that role, and so that where you have predictability once you finish playing that role, because you don't know what you're going to do otherwise. And so to have that role stripped away from you, and then the security of the continuity of that role stripped away from you, and the savings that may have gone from the accumulation of playing that role, to then be able to fall back on in the future, having both of those at this time stripped away because markets are collapsing and savings are being imploded and used. And if you don't have a role to go back to, you don't have savings to fall back upon, then where do you fall back to? And that's where people just figure there's no hope, and they figure the only way out then is to take their life, unfortunately.
And we see in eras like this, eras of the Great Depression, it's the people at Square that suicide, because their deep need for financial security is so fundamentally rocked. So that's why I'm saying have compassion for the people you know at this terrain. Some of them may have stable jobs and nothing's been affected, but others may have lost their job, or even worse, they don't know if they've lost their job. Everything's totally up in the air. And for those people, this can be a very, very scary time, because that deep-seated need to have a plan in place that will ensure their financial security has been really, really messed with at the moment and really rocked, and that can create a huge amount of fear. That can lead to a lot of depression that we're seeing. I hope it doesn't lead to a lot of suicide, but it could. And this is one of the biggest problems happening right now for people at this terrain. And one of the other key ones at Square that you are going to touch on, you're going to touch this spot, and it's going to be a sensitive spot. If you're at pyramid or you're at diamond, you're at circle or you're at spiral, and you're interacting with someone at Square, if you say something that suggests there is no virus, or the virus is caused by something other than what the official media says, if you have a different opinion on it, you're going to get a lot of blowback from someone at Square. It's not going to be, oh yeah, let's have some friendly debate about this. Normally, someone at Square is very open to debate. Like, they're interested in your opinion, they're interested in differing views, but on a topic like this, which is very much ground zero for Square, it's very touchy, it's highly charged. And the reason it's very highly charged is that Square is a collective terrain. And the survival strategy at Square is that we are all a collective, and we're all operating under the same smoothly running system that is designed to keep us all safe. So either we all survive or we all die. So anything that threatens the collective is absolutely touchy for Square. So something like a virus, something like a war, something like a vaccine issue. These are things that are very close to home for people at Square, because their belief is if we do not stop this, then the whole group will get wiped out. They don't have an individualist stance on this. It's all or none. It's different than something like poverty or famine, which might strike some unfortunate people and not others. This is something that can spread. This is something that's contagious. It can wipe out the whole group. And that's ground zero for Square. That is very close to the bone for Square. So if you have a different opinion on the cause of the virus, or the way it spreads, or the strategies that people should take, or the approaches that should be taken, if you have a different view on that, you're going to come against massive flack. And that's not because they don't think you have a right to an opinion. It's because they're so triggered. Someone at Square is in terror. It's so close to home for their sense of survival. That's why it's so highly charged. So just understand that, have some compassion for that. You're touching a very raw nerve.
Well, to underscore this point, I was listening to a talk by one of the former UK prime ministers. It was mentioning herd immunity. So this idea you hear oftentimes in vaccination debates is, well, we need to have herd immunity and that's why we need vaccines. He was mentioning the possibility of creating herd immunity by just letting this thing run its course and letting, the herd then be able to, become more immune to it if it's not as deadly as it's being purported to be. So there's some debate as to which way to go there, but the idea here and the point to be taken is that the mentality, the perception is of the herd and either an immunization of the herd or the collective preservation of the herd. It's a collective thought form, and that's what really needs to be gotten at here. So when you're dealing with someone at Square, if you're from another terrain, or if you're at this terrain, understand that yes, it is an important foundation to make sure that we're all working in alignment so that we have safety in the group.
Exactly. And I also just want to address one last fear, which we did touch on a little bit in our first video about Square, but I just want to go into it a little bit more about the whole reason we called this terrain the order-based terrain is because the primary fear underlying everything in this terrain is the fear of chaos. And it's chaos of the Wild West. At Pyramid, it's chaos of humans run amok for their own self-interest without any governing regulations. And it's also fear of the chaos of nature. And a virus, as currently understood by mainstream Square, a virus is the classic example of nature run amok. It's like something that come from a pig or come from a bat or come from an animal and it somehow jumped onto a human and it's spreading and it's killing us all. That is the fear of chaos, the fear of nature. It's out of our control. We need to band together to come up with a solution for this. You can understand why the level of charge around this issue is so strong. And then when you add to that the fear of chaos of human ego, if it was unregulated, how people might behave, the fear of people going out without masks, without hand sanitizers, just partying on, people at Pyramid who don't care about the collective well-being, the fear that this thing will spread really quickly if everyone's selfish, you can see why there's such a strong need for order. Because it's not just the chaos of humans that's trying to be regulated, it's the chaos of nature that's trying to be regulated and fought against here.
Well, that's a fantastic point because it's an outer terrain, then it is fearing what it can't control.
Exactly. So that's not everything happening at Square, but that's a good summary of the biggest fears that are coming at this terrain and that you might accidentally touch on if you interact with someone at this terrain, or if you are at this terrain yourself, you're probably feeling a lot of these fears, and just to understand where they're coming from and that it's okay that you have them. Every terrain has their own reaction to this crisis. Every terrain has their own issues, their own challenges, their own fears. We've just been talking about the ones at Square, and it's totally fine to have those fears. This is the terrain you're at, and this is natural. It's how you're feeling, and it's okay. And in our next video, we're going to look at the other side of this. We're going to look at the inspirational perspective that so many people at Square are bringing to this crisis, and things that you could say to someone who's at this terrain to really inspire them and uplift them and give them hope.
We'll see you in the next video.